Hey guys, my name is Alex, and today I'm going to teach you how to make cool videos like the one you saw at the beginning of this video using my new Emanating Rings workflow. So basically what this workflow lets you do is input a video, like in this case I have a video of this girl playing the drum, and what you're going to get is an output that looks like this, where you get this cool expanding waves effect based on the mask of your choice. So you can either choose the subject, in this case I picked the girl, but you could also have it emanating from some other object in the scene, like the drum. So if you haven't already used any of my workflows before, I highly recommend you go watch my base workflows guide. This will teach you how to set up every common element in this workflow, including the input section, the prompt, the models, animate diff, IP adapters, control nets, etc. So in this guide, I'm just going to go over what you need to know in order to get this emanating rings mask effect working correctly. Alright, so first things first, what you're going to want to do is come over here to the audio processing group in the top left of the workflow, and you're going to want to check all of these audio previews to see which audio stem actually grabbed the best signal from your input video. So in this case, the drums audio was pretty silent. I didn't really get a good signal from that. There's no vocals in the video, so I didn't get anything here. There's not really a whole lot of bass, so this is pretty much silent as well. But most of the sound was actually grabbed by the other. So the other is just every bit of audio that's not in either drums, vocals, or bass. And you can see that reflected if we look at the audio feature graphs here. So each one of these groups is represented by one of the stems that it's processing. So here we have the bass, here drums, other, and vocals. So if you look here, we have the original feature graph. So this is basically just a representation of the amplitude of the signal that we got when we separated the audio out. So you can see here that the bass is pretty much silent. There's like one peak here, but not a very consistent picture of the actual sound that we want. And the idea is we want to pick a signal that best represents the feature that we want. So in this case, every time the girl is hitting the drum, I want to trigger some emanating rings. And the best signal we got for that is in the other group. So you can see here for the first 50 frames, nothing happens, she's not playing, and then as soon as we reach this 50th frame, she starts hitting the drum, and then we start getting some signal. So we can use this these peaks and troughs here to actually actuate when we have the waves emanate from the mask. So if you want to use this kind of raw input signal here, then make sure you set these two Boolean fields to false, and this will just use the raw input signal. Otherwise, you can use, if you want to use a filter here, so this is basically just a collection of filters that will isolate parts of that audio signal. So if you're not getting a clean enough signal on its own, you can use this filter and try and narrow down the specific part of the audio that you want. And you can turn that on by using this Boolean field, use audio filter, set it to true. Otherwise, you can actually use this feature mod mixer, which will help to, there's a lot of effects you can add here, but you can add smoothing to it, you can increase the attack, the release, change the floor, so you can put a cap on the signal, you can put a floor on the signal, you can increase the gain. There's documentation for all the different effects here. If you click on the little question mark in the corner, and so you can get an idea of how these parameters will affect the final feature signal. And if you need more documentation, you can visit RyanOnTheInside's GitHub, and also some of his video guides and tutorials. So thanks to Ryan for providing that. If you want to enable this mixer, you can set this use feature mod mixer Boolean field to true. Otherwise, you can leave it false, and we're just going to use this original feature seen in the original feature graph. So once we have decided on a signal and we've messed with our mixer settings to make sure it's set up the way we want it to, we'll come over to the Emanating Rings mask section. And this is where you're actually going to select which audio stem you're using to trigger the emanations, and also which mask that is going to be the target of these rings. So if you come up here to the top, you'll see currently I have audio other feature set as the input audio source. But if I wanted to use the drums feature, for example, then I would click on this. I would come down here to the audio section, and you'll see I have audio bass feature, audio drums feature, other vocals. So just make sure you select, audio underscore whatever your stem is, and then feature, and not just the audio with the feature or audio stem itself. So in this case, I want to use the other feature. So I'm going to do audio underscore other underscore feature. So we got that. And then what we want to do is target which mask in our input video we want to actually have the rings expand from. So in this case, I know that the input subject is the red mask, so I'm going to target them with the subject mask red variable. But if you want to change which mask you're targeting, you can scroll down here to the bottom, and you can see there's a few options. So you could do subject mask green, subject mask red, or subject mask blue, depending on which mask you want the rings to expand from. So to show you an example of what that looks like, currently I have this set to red, so it's going to expand off of the mask created for the player, like the girl here. Otherwise, if I have my own mask that I've created with more objects, so in my video utils workflow, which I'll link in the description, I created a segmentation where I have the girl is the red subject mask here, and then her drum is actually the green subject mask. And then I composited that together. So if I wanted to, I could enable this upload subject mask group. I could bypass the segment dancer group. And now I'm going to be using this mask video instead of this one. So what you'll see is if I hit Q here, we're going to have our output composite video contain that original mask. So yes, see, now we have the subject, which is red. Also, her drum is green. So if I want to change the target of these rings from the girl to her drum, I'll come down here, go to subject mask, click on subject mask green. And if we cue again, now you'll see that the rings are going to be expanding from the drum instead of from the girl. Just like that. So yeah, there's a lot of powerful effects you can use this for. Moving on, so now we can actually see the Flex Mask Emanating Rings node. So this is what is actually generating the masked rings. So there's a few parameters on this, and one of the most important that you're going to have to adjust is the feature threshold. So this is basically what is setting the cutoff on what levels of feature data to use as the trigger point for these emanating rings. So in my case, I've set this to 0.4. And if we go over to our other audio feature graph here, you'll see that right around 0.4, we're sort of intersecting between a lot of these peaks and troughs. And so what that does is it's going to give a lot of variation in when rings are triggered and when they're not triggered. Specifically, they're triggered on beats. So when she hits the drum, there's a spike in feature input. And when there's a gap between hits, it sort of will not generate the rings. So you can see if you set this threshold very high to, let's say, 1.0, then there's very few events that are actually going to trigger the rings. So you're going to get almost no rings generated whatsoever. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if you set the feature threshold too low to 0, for example, we're going to be essentially generating rings on every frame. So then that might not be what you want either. So just look at this graph, try and pick a value that sits nicely with the variations in some of the peaks and troughs, and just experiment with it and see what kind of effects you get in the video. So moving down from this node, basically if you want to adjust some of the effects, like how many rings are generated, the width of the rings, the number of rings and all that, you can click on this little question mark in the corner again. If you get this overlapping error, what you can do is you can close that, minimize the load video node, open it again so you can actually read it. And this will just tell you how each of these parameters works and, recommended settings to adjust. So this is just going to take some experimentation depending on the effect that you want. You can change the feature parameter, which will modulate whether or not your input feature data from the audio will affect the number of rings, or the width of the rings, or the speed. In my case, I just set it to all. So that's the major settings for the Emanating Rings node. Down here, you can actually change the color of the rings and the color of the background. So in this case, I've set it to the rings are black and the background is yellow, but I could also change the rings to be more of like a magenta color. So if I run this, you'll see in our composite video, now the rings are magenta instead of black. And what this is going to do is it's going to change which IP adapters are targeting which mask color. So for example, if I go down to my IP adapter section, you'll see that each IP adapter is color coordinated to target the mask that is the color of the group. So if my rings are black, then they're going to be targeted by the black IP adapter. So they're going to inherit this sort of reference image, this sort of color. And then you'll see that the background is yellow. So I'm using it with this multi-IP adapter setup. And what this is going to let you do is, you can choose multiple images and it will transition between those images over time. So, if you just want one reference image for the rings and one reference image for the background, you could change the background to say black and change the rings to be white, and then you'll just be using one reference image per mask color. But if you want the background to be changing, like crossfading between reference images over time, then you can set it to either yellow or magenta, and make sure you unbypass these IP adapter groups and make sure you set up all your images, you set up your custom weights schedule, and that should work. So that is the major settings for the Emanating Rings mask. If you've already created a full-length Emanating Rings mask composite video like this, you can go ahead and save it, save that preview, and then if you don't want to have to regenerate the video every time you run the workflow, you can come over here, you can bypass the Emanating Rings group, go to your override composite, and then upload that video to this upload video node here. And then every time you run the workflow, instead of regenerating all those composite, all the rings, it'll just take from that existing video and use that instead. So that's the major section. That's the main feature of this workflow, is the Emanating Rings mask section. If you want to have the original input mask from your input video be overlaid onto the output, you can of course use this latent noise mask group. So in my case, I set the red subject mask group to bypass, and this is basically going to tell the sampler not to fill in or sample that particular mask. So everything that's black in this final composite preview here will be taken from the original input video instead of being generated from scratch by your model. So that's basically the most important parts of the Emanating Mask or Emanating Rings workflow. If you guys have more questions, I have set up a custom GPT with all of the information regarding this workflow as part of its knowledge base. So I'll leave links to the GPT in the description. I've also written a Notion guide for this workflow if you'd like to read that instead. I'll post the links in the workflow, in this workflow help note over here. And as always, if this guide helped you, make sure to like this video and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next one.